In this presentation, we will be describing the TAC project known as Gateway 5010. If we take a look at the service located on the right-hand side of this diagram, we'll see a business service labeled Inquire Member Eligibility. This service is the only business service that's a part of the Gateway 5010 project. All of the other services that are noted on this diagram are technical services, and they're used to support the use case of a provider on the other side of the internet using the Inquire Member Eligibility MITA Business Service in a HIPAA compliant manner from their practice location. The Gateway 5010 project had a secondary goal that was to use other industry initiatives such as CAQH's CORE, CAQH standing for the Council for Affordable Quality Healthcare, and CORE standing for the Common Operating Rules for Information Exchange. So CAQH's CORE's set of standards, along with HITSP standing for the Health Information Technology Standards Panel. So the goal was to reach out into the healthcare community, identify other relevant initiatives that were occurring in the exchange of information between a provider and a payer, and put them as a part of the Gateway 5010 project. Now we're going to walk through the flow of information in Gateway 5010's implementation of a provider verifying member eligibility using the MITA Inquire Member Eligibility Service. This process begins on the left-hand side of the screen at a provider's location where, through their desktop software or practice management system, the provider enters the patient's information into the screen inside of the provider application. The provider software then converts that patient information into a HIPAA-compliant 270 transaction and uses the CAQH CORE connectivity standard to transmit that 270 request across a secure connection on the internet to a waiting MITA technical service labeled as the CORE connectivity service. As the first step in this process, the MITA technical service for CORE connectivity must ensure that the individual sending the request can be authenticated. In other words, ensuring that they are who they say they are. Consistent with the CORE rules, this can be accomplished based on username and password combination or a digital certificate included in the message sent from the provider. The MITA CORE connectivity service can process either the username password combination or the digital certificate. The CORE connectivity service will call another MITA technical service for authentication. The authentication service will look up in the identity management system to determine if that user is known to the system and return the results of that lookup to the CORE connectivity service. If the user is known to the system, then the transaction will proceed. If the user is not known to the system, then that transaction will be rejected and no further steps will be taken. If the user passed the authentication test, then an audit trail entry is made in the system indicating that the specified user has submitted a request. Audit trails are critical for ensuring that the system can meet HIPAA and the ARRA privacy requirements. Audit trails are a means by which we can determine who is doing what to any member's information in the system. Once the audit trail information has been written to the log, the CORE connectivity service calls the authorization service to determine if the requesting user is authorized to perform the functions they are requesting. The incoming request to the CORE connectivity service has several components, including the username, password for authentication purposes, and metadata indicating what the request is for. If that request is tagged for eligibility, as it will be in this case, then the payload will be an X12-270 transaction. The authorization service now determines if that particular user who is submitting the request is permitted to perform the requested function, in this case, an eligibility inquiry. If this user has permission to inquire on member eligibility, then the next technical service will be called. If this user does not have permission, then the request is rejected. As stated above, the incoming message from the provider needs to be a HIPAA and core compliant payload. This means that the incoming payload will be in HIPAA compliant X12-270 format. The Mighty Business service, on the other hand, Inquire Member Eligibility, has established that its inputs and outputs are going to be formatted as XML documents. For this reason, there needs to be a technical service that transforms the X12 payload that was submitted by the provider into an HL7 information architecture aligned Inquire Member Eligibility Mighty Business service. And the trigger needs to be formatted in that specified XML document format. Therefore, we need an adapter, and this adapter is intelligent enough to understand the request in the payload, an X12-270. Because it can understand the 270, the adapter can do an additional level of authorization, specifically determining if the member that is being inquired on can be inquired on from the person who is submitting the request. The adapter can then call the authorization service to determine if this user can inquire on this particular member. If the authorization determines that the operation is allowed, the process continues. And if it is not allowed, then the request is rejected. The audit trail entry is made by calling the audit trail service, and the conversion of the X12 to XML required by the member eligibility is completed. So at this point, we have a information architecture compliant XML message to be forwarded to the Inquire Member Eligibility service. The Inquire Member Eligibility service is now called with that HL7 aligned trigger, and the business service accesses the repositories that contain the member eligibility information. Business rules are applied that will ensure that the result of this process can produce a CAQH core compliant response. The Inquire Member Eligibility business process calls the authorization and audit trail technical services at the appropriate times. The Inquire Member Eligibility service then calls the adapter, which will convert the result of the Inquire Member Eligibility XML document back into a CAQH core compliant 271 response that is formatted in an X12 format. And then the adapter will again call the CAQH core connectivity so that the HIPAA CAQH core X12 response can be transmitted back to the requesting provider.